Hello all, my name is Virginia Castor and today I'm going to be giving a presentation on religious coping and psychological functioning in a correctional population. So the main objective of this study was to examine the main and interactive relationships between religious upbringing and coping and mental health outcomes in incarcerated adults. The study focused on spirituality, participation, pleading, and discontentment as the aspects of coping, and then the mental health outcomes associated with those, such as depressive symptoms, anxiety symptoms, somatization, and hostility. So for a little bit of background, the demographics here that we have in our study is out of 305 participants, 105 of them reported being raised Protestant, about 34%. 24% reported being raised Catholic, and 17% reported being raised with no formal religion. There was not a significant difference between genders in this demographics, but there was for ethnic groups. Caucasians and those in multi-ethnic groups were more likely to report no formal religion. Religious coping. What is religious coping? To find this out and to really evaluate it, the researchers used a measure taken from the Religious Coping Activity Scale, the RCAS, which has about 27 items, but I think they revoked 2 of them just for not being relevant to the study. They used a 4-point scale from not at all to a great deal, where participants got to mark in there where they felt they most agreed with certain statements related to religious coping. For example, trusting God would not let anything terrible happen to me. And then they could mark how strongly they agreed with that statement. For participation, they wanted to study attended religious services or participated in religious rituals. And women actually showed a higher mean score for religious participation compared to men. Women also displayed a higher mean spirituality score than men. There was also significant differences between ethnic groups, where Caucasians reported the lowest level of spirituality compared to African and Native Americans. Onto the methods section for some more demographics. All of this was at the North Rehabilitation Facility, and all of the participants were volunteers. The average age of participant was 38 years old, and it ranged from 20 years old to 61 years old. Inmates convicted of sexual or violent crimes were not included in this study, which we are going to talk about a little bit more. I have a little qualm with this. And right here at the bottom, we can see some percentages of the demographics here. You got 61% white, 13% African American, 7% Latin American, 11% Native American, 1% Asian American, 5% multi-ethnic, and 1% of others. So some of the measures that they used in this study were, they had a basic demographic questionnaire for gender, ethnicity, and education, and religious upbringing. They also used the Religious Coping Activity Scale, the RCAS, as I mentioned earlier, the Brief Symptom Inventory, the BSI, and the Life Events Checklist, LEC. And this was a self-report survey-based study. So what do some of these measures do? What are they measuring? What do they mean? Religious Activities Coping Scale, the RACS, is a scale that measures the extent to which people turn to religion to cope with stress. Another example from this one was Experience God's Love and Care. The Brief Symptom Inventory assesses psychological distress and psychopathology. The Life Events Checklist it screens individuals for potentially traumatic life events. There's about 16 events that are strongly correlated with PTSD, and they want to see how many people have essentially checked off those things. Not that you would want to be checking off traumatic events in your life, but you get the idea. So the results here are very interesting. For depression symptoms, somatization, and hostility, there was no significant difference found across gender or ethnicity. Anxiety was higher in women, but not differentiated by ethnicity. Stressful life events were positively correlated with the 4 psychological outcomes: depression, anxiety, somatization, and hostility. And there was significant interaction between stressful life events and religious pleading. And this makes sense. If something goes wrong, you don't know where else to turn to. I can see how people would be very more likely to engage in religious pleading during stressful life events. So why is all of this important? Ultimately, this study has high significance and implications for improving our correctional system as a country by better understanding incarcerated individuals, knowing where they're coming from, where they're going, how they're doing. It's all very important. These findings imply that a religious upbringing can actually help shelter an individual from depression and anxiety. Mean hostility scores were lower in those raised with some kind of formal religion. Women having higher anxiety scores, but also higher spirituality and religious participation is something that's very interesting to me, though. This could and should be explored further in the future. I would hypothesize that a higher spirituality and religious participation would make you less anxious, but for women, it seemed that it made them more anxious. Correlation isn't causation. That's why I was saying we have to study it. Critical analysis. This study did not have any violent offenders participating. I did mention this earlier. And I wonder if there's a threshold for hostility reduction aided by religious upbringing. Is a religious upbringing still effective at negating hostility and other symptoms in more violent incarcerated adults? Is there a certain threshold for how much religion and religiosity can actually help? This measure used for the studies did seem reliable and valid, and this is relevant to me as someone who is minoring in criminal justice. Incarcerated individuals face so much stress and vulnerability, and I would really like to know more about why a religious upbringing is able to provide essentially treatment to these negative symptoms associated with being in prison. What is it about religiosity specifically that leads individuals to feeling this relief? Is there a way to achieve this without necessarily organized religion or the concept of a higher being? Is there a way to achieve this secularly, essentially? Or is all of that vital to this effect? Something that I would love to see studied more. In conclusion, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. This was such a fascinating topic to study, and I appreciate you all being here. Thanks so much. Y'all have a good one.